a romantic haunting. She recorded dreams so vivid they felt like memories. Dreams of Tochiku's deep, resonant voice whispering her name, and the way his calloused hands used to hold her face with a reverence Henry could never replicate. The intimacy of the mind, Foma wrote about the physical longing that consumed her. In her dreams, their lovemaking wasn't just a duty, as it often felt with Henry, but a fierce, spiritual reunion. She described the heat of his skin and the way their rhythms matched perfectly, a stark contrast to the polite, clinical marriage she resided in. The growing chasm. Every time Foma closed her diary, the distance between her and Henry grew. She became a ghost in her own home. Emotional withdrawal. When Henry spoke of hospital expansions or social galas, Foma would offer a practiced, plastic smile while her mind drifted back to her GST lecture hall in Insuka. The physical wall. She began staying late at the pharmacy or feigning headaches to avoid intimacy, terrified that if Henry touched her, he would feel the Tochiku she was hiding just beneath her skin. Henry, a man trained to diagnose physical ailments, was blind to the terminal heartbreak of his wife. He saw a quiet woman. He didn't realize he was living with a woman whose heart was miles away, locked in a law firm in Lagos, held captive by a man who had finally become everything she ever wanted, but too late.
We used to have something. I don't remember it. Do you need assistance? She's gone.
The walls of the sprawling mansion drive Henry had built for Foma began to feel less like a sanctuary and more like a silent battlefield. For Henry, a man who navigated the complexities of human anatomy with surgical precision, the mystery of his wife's heart was a diagnosis he couldn't reach. The bedroom of glass. The most agonizing part of Henry's frustration was the physical wall Foma had constructed. It wasn't a sudden collapse of their intimacy, but a slow, agonizing erosion. Every night followed a predictable, heartbreaking script. Henry would approach her with the tenderness of a husband seeking connection, only to be met with a repertoire of excuses that became a painful routine. The pharmacist's fatigue. She would claim the stress of the hospital pharmacy had drained her voice flat and rehearsed. The physical shield. She began wearing elaborate, heavy sleepwear, layers of silk and cotton that acted as a psychological barrier, signaling her unavailability before a word was even spoken. The feigned sleep. Often, Henry would enter the room to find her turned away, her breathing regulated and shallow, pretending to be lost in a sleep that he knew was a lie. Henry's frustration wasn't merely sexual, it was the sting of rejection. He felt like a stranger in his own bed, a provider who was allowed to give her the world but forbidden from touching her soul. He began to question himself, wondering if his touch had become repulsive or if he had failed her in a way he couldn't see. The social eclipse. Foma's withdrawal extended far beyond the bedroom. The vibrant woman who once walked the halls of UNN with grace had vanished, replaced by a ghost who haunted the corners of her own life. The death of the socialite. Dr. Henry's position required a certain level of social visibility. There were medical galas, alumni dinners, and charity auctions. Initially, Foma accompanied him as the trophy wife, but soon, the excuses migrated to their social life. She developed migraines every Friday night. She had urgent stock-taking at the pharmacy whenever a wedding invitation arrived. Eventually, she stopped making excuses altogether, simply stating, "I'm staying in." The professional decline. Even at the hospital pharmacy, the change was jarring. Her colleagues, who once admired her sharp wit and meticulous nature, noticed the 1,000-yard stare. She ate lunch alone in her office, the door locked. She stopped participating in the light-hearted gossip of the break room. Her laughter, once melodic and frequent, had become a rare, mechanical sound that never reached her eyes. The indoor hermit. Foma's life became a narrow corridor between her workplace and her bedroom. She cut off her friends, ignoring calls and leaving messages unread for weeks. Her world shrunk to the size of her leather-bound diary and the memories of a man who lived across the bridge in Lagos. Henry's frustration reached a boiling point when he realized that Afoma wasn't just tired, she was absent. He would sit in their expansive living room, watching her stare out the window at nothing for hours. Afoma, you are here, but you are not here asterisk, he once shouted in a fit of rare, desperate anger. She had responded with a look of such profound, hollow sadness that it chilled his blood. He was a doctor, and he knew a dying patient when he saw one. What he didn't realize was that Afoma wasn't physically ill, she was mourning. She was a woman living in a beautiful house, married to a successful man, yet she was starving for the determined and fearless love of a man who didn't need a father's hospital to prove his worth. Her isolation was her only way to keep the memory of Tochukwu untainted by the reality of her marriage. Every social outing avoided was a gift to the ghost of her first love. Every night spent alone was a page added to the secret history of the life she truly wanted. The silence of Afoma's life eventually became so loud that she could no longer ignore the impulse to find the man she had lost. It started on a rainy Tuesday, the kind of weather that reminded her of Nsukka, when she sat in her pharmacy and typed his name into a search bar. The digital ghost hunt. Afoma spent weeks scouring the internet for Tochukwu surname. She searched through LinkedIn, Facebook, and Instagram, hoping to see a face that had aged alongside her heart. But she found nothing. Tochukwu had vanished from the digital world the moment he entered the high-stakes arena of Lagos litigation. In the world of Zenith Chambers asterisk, privacy was a weapon. Tochukwu had scrubbed his personal profiles, choosing to exist only in legal journals and court registries. He didn't want the world to see his personal life, he wanted them to fear his legal mind. To Afoma's growing despair, it felt as though the man she loved had been erased from the earth. The watcher in the shadows, Zenith Shark. What Afoma didn't realize was that while she was looking for a ghost, a shark was watching her. For years, a mysterious account with the handle at Zenith Shark had been a silent follower of her private Instagram page. The account had no profile picture, just a dark silhouette, and 0 posts. Afoma had often wondered who it was, but in her state of emotional withdrawal, she assumed it was just a random bot or a distant professional acquaintance from the hospital. Zenith Shark never liked her photos. He never commented, but he was always the first to view her stories. When she posted a picture of a sunset with a cryptic, lonely caption, he viewed it within minutes. When she shared a photo of her pharmacy's anniversary, he was there, a silent witness to her professional success. He watched the subtle decline in her posts, from smiling photos to pictures of rainy windows and open books. Tochukwu, behind the mask of a Zenith Shark, was using the account as his only window into the life he had been forced to leave behind. He saw her sadness through the screen. He saw the doctor's wife persona she wore like a heavy cloak, and his heart ached, but he remained disciplined. He was a man of the law, he wouldn't interfere in a marriage unless he was invited. The moment of revelation, the breakthrough didn't come from a search engine, it came from a moment of professional intersection. One evening, while Henry was away at a medical conference, Afoma was browsing a legal news site, trying to find information on the famous Zenith Chambers she had heard people whispering about at dinner parties. She clicked on a high-definition video of a press conference following a landmark Supreme Court win. The camera zoomed in on the lead partner. He was dressed in a bespoke charcoal suit, his posture commanding, his voice a deep, resonant baritone that sent a physical shock through Afoma's body. It was him. It was Tochukwu. Driven by a sudden, frantic intuition, she went back to her Instagram and looked at the Zenith chart profile again. She looked at the following list of the account. It followed only 3 things: the Nigerian Bar Association, UNN alumni, and her. She then noticed a tiny detail she had missed for years. In the bio of the Zenith Shark account, there was a single quote in Latin. Ubi ama, ibi oculus. Where there is love, there is the eye. It was the same quote Tochukwu had scribbled on the back of her GST 101 notebook during their first year at Nsukka. The realization hit her like a physical blow. The shark wasn't a stranger, it was her Tochukwu. He had been there all along, watching her from the shadows of his success, staying silent out of respect for the very life she was currently suffocating in. Afoma dropped her phone, her breath hitching in her throat. She looked at her diary, then at the screen, and finally at the door of the house she shared with Henry. The silence was over. The hunter had been found, and the shark was no longer just a ghost in her feed. The professional triumph of Barrister Tochukwu was a stark contrast to the emotional desert of his personal life. While he was a master of the courtroom, capable of dissecting witnesses with surgical precision, he was a failure at moving on. For Tochukwu, every woman who walked into his life after Afoma was merely a ghost trying to fill a space that had been permanently shaped by a pharmacy student from UNN. The search for a substitute, the 3 relationships. After law school, Tochukwu tried to follow the logical path. He knew he was a rising star and that a man of his status needed a partner. However, his heart was a locked vault, and he had thrown away the key back in Nsukka. 1. Amaka, the intellectual peer. Amaka was a fellow lawyer at a rival firm. She was brilliant, sharp-tongued, and understood the grueling hours of Zenith Chambers. On paper, they were a power couple. They attended bar galas together and debated case law over expensive dinners in Victoria Island. The void, Tochukwu found her too clinical. When he looked at her, he didn't see the warmth he remembered in the GST halls. Their relationship felt like a merger and acquisition rather than a romance. He eventually ended it when he realized he was more interested in her legal briefs than her soul. 2. Kemi, the high society stylist. In his quest to feel something, anything, Tochukwu dated Kemi, a vibrant fashion consultant who introduced him to the glitz of Lagos nightlife. She was the polar opposite of Afoma, loud, extroverted, and deeply embedded in the social scene. The void, the noise of Kemi's world only highlighted Tochukwu's internal silence. While she danced at exclusive clubs, he would sit at the VIP table, nursing a drink and wondering if Afoma still liked her tea with 2 cubes of sugar. Kemi eventually left him, frustrated by his emotional distance, calling him a man who lived in a black and white movie. 3. Blessing, the attempt at simplicity. Blessing was kind, soft-spoken, and reminded him of the humility of his own roots. She was a schoolteacher who asked for nothing but his time. The void, this was the most painful failure. Tochukwu tried to love her simplicity, but he realized that he didn't just want kindness, he wanted the specific, fiery, intellectual, and spiritual spark he had with Afoma. He felt like a villain for not being able to love a good woman, eventually breaking her heart because he couldn't stop comparing her silence to Afoma's laughter. The moments of weakness, the temptation to reach out. Whenever these relationships crumbled, Tochukwu would retreat to his penthouse office at Zenith Chambers. In the dead of night, with the Lagos skyline shimmering outside, the weight of his success felt like lead because he had no one to share it with. The digital precipice. On two specific occasions, the chaos of his lonely life almost broke his resolve. 1. The night of the partnership. After he was named a partner, the pinnacle of his career, he sat with his phone in hand. He had found Afoma's Instagram profile. He typed out a message. I made it, Afoma. I have the house, the name, and the security. Is it too late? His thumb hovered over the send button for an hour before the fearless lawyer succumbed to fear. He deleted the text, realizing she was a married woman and he had no right to wreck her peace. 2. The anniversary of the breakup. On the date they had officially ended things at UNN, Tochukwu got uncharacteristically drunk on expensive scotch. He logged into at Zenith Shark and opened her latest photo, a picture of her looking pale and tired at the pharmacy. He almost called her, his heart screaming that she looked as miserable as he felt. The inner conflict. Tochukwu's struggle was the success paradox. He had worked so hard to become the man Afoma's parents wanted, only to realize that in the process of becoming that man, he had lost the very woman he was doing it for. Every date was an interview she was failing. Every intimate moment with another woman felt like a betrayal of a ghost. He remained, Zenith Shark, a predator in the courtroom, but a silent, pining observer in the digital world, waiting for a sign that the doctor's wife was still the girl who once shared her lunch with a poor law student. The moment Afoma realized that the mysterious Zenith Shark was Tochukwu, the dams she had built around her heart for years finally burst. The silence of her bedroom, usually filled only with the rhythmic breathing of a husband she felt no spark for, was suddenly electric. Her fingers trembled as she stared at the message button. This wasn't just a DM. It was a breach of the life she had meticulously constructed. But the pain of her gilded cage was now greater than her fear of the unknown. The first reach, breaking the silence. She didn't start with, I love you, or, I miss you. She started with the one thing only they knew. At 1:14 a.m., she typed, Afoma, does the lion of the bar still remember the taste of the cold okpa we used to eat behind the GST building? She didn't expect an answer. She assumed a partner at Zenith Chambers would be too busy, or perhaps he had finally moved on. But the scene icon appeared almost instantly. 2 grey bubbles danced on the screen, mocking her heartbeat. At Zenith Shark, I haven't tasted anything as good since then. I've been waiting for you to find me, Afoma. The digital confession. What began as a tentative greeting turned into an all-night outpouring of years of suppressed grief and longing. Their chat became a sanctuary where the doctor's wife and the fearless barrister shed their titles. The depth of her pain, Afoma told him about her diary. She admitted that while she lived in a mansion, she was mentally living in a one-room apartment in Nsukka. She told him about the emotional torture of her marriage, not that Henry was a bad man, but that he was simply not him. The revelation of the shark, Tochukwu confessed why he had been following her silently. He told her about the 3 women he tried to date and how each one was a failed attempt to find her spirit in someone else's body. I became a shark in the courtroom so I could build the world I promised you, he typed. But I realized I built a palace with an empty throne. The evolution of the chat. As the days passed, the chatting became an addiction. It was no longer just about the past. It was about a desperate present. 1. The hidden screen. Afoma became a master of digital espionage. She changed his name in her contacts to a generic pharmaceutical supplier to avoid Henry's suspicion. She would chat with him while sitting across from Henry at dinner, her face illuminated by the glow of her phone, a secret smile playing on her lips that Henry mistakenly attributed to work success. 2. The shared dreams. They began to exchange what-if scenarios. Tochukwu would describe his penthouse in Lagos and where her piano would sit. Afoma would send him snippets from her diary, the raw, unfiltered descriptions of her dreams about him. Afoma, I dreamed of us last night. We weren't in Lagos or in Suka. We were just together. No titles, no suitors, no parents. Just you and me. Tochukwu, in my world, that isn't a dream. It's a goal. I've won every case I've ever taken, Afoma. I don't plan on losing this one. 3. The growing distance from Henry. The more she chatted with Tochukwu, the more repulsive her reality became. Every good night, honey, from Henry felt like a lie. The chat was her oxygen, her marriage was the carbon monoxide slowly stifling her. She stopped writing in her physical diary because the chat was her living diary now. The dangerous threshold. The tone of their messages eventually shifted from nostalgic to urgent. The Zenith Shark was no longer content with just watching. Tochukwu, I see you in your photos, Afoma. I see the light that has gone out of your eyes. He provides for you, but he doesn't see you. I have the resources now. I have the name. I am no longer that boy who had nothing to offer. Afoma stared at the screen, tears blurring the text. She was a pharmacist, a wife, and a woman of reputation, but in the blue light of the chat, she was just a girl from UNN who wanted to go home. The chat had bridged the gap between Lagos and her heart, and for the first time in years, she felt the terrifying, beautiful possibility of an escape.
You're throwing everything away! This separation brings shame to our house. Is this truly what you both want?
The silence in the mansion finally became deafening. Dr. Henry, a man trained to listen to the subtle murmurs of a failing heart, could no longer ignore the terminal state of his own marriage. The woman who shared his bed was a phantom, and the gulf between them had widened into an uncrossable ocean. Henry's breaking point. Henry's frustration turned into a cold, hard clarity. He noticed that Afoma no longer looked at him when he spoke. Her gaze was always fixed on her phone or lost in the middle distance. The final straw came when he surprised her with an anniversary trip to the Maldives, and she responded not with joy, but with a look of trapped panic. He realized he wasn't competing with another man in the room, he was competing with a ghost that lived in her mind. I have given you a life most women dream of, Henry shouted during their final confrontation. But you treat this home like a prison and me like the warden. I am a husband, Afoma, not a spectator in your life. The intervention of the elders. Driven by a mix of heartbreak and wounded pride, Henry took the matter to Afoma's parents. In a traditional setting, a husband complaining to his in-laws is a grave signal that the foundation is crumbling. The parents' plea, her father, who had once championed Henry as the secure choice, was distraught. They called a family meeting, pleading with Afoma to regain her senses. They reminded her of the prestige of the marriage and the shame of a broken home. Afoma's defiance. For the first time in her life, the soft-spoken pharmacist stood her ground. She didn't shout, she simply spoke with the weary honesty of someone who had been holding their breath for years. You chose a husband for me based on his father's hospital, she told them. But you forgot that I am the one who has to live in the silence of his house. My soul is not here. It hasn't been for a long time. The finality of the gavel. When it became clear that Afoma would not, or could not, change, Henry made the hardest decision of his life. He filed for divorce. He was a man of dignity, and he refused to be a placeholder in his own home. The divorce proceedings were surprisingly quiet, because Afoma wanted nothing from the doctor's world, no alimony, no property, no settlement. The legal process moved with clinical speed. They signed the papers in a cold office, a stark contrast to the flamboyant wedding they had celebrated years prior. As they walked out of the court, Henry looked at her one last time. I hope you find whatever it is you're looking for in that phone of yours, he said quietly before driving away. The road to Lagos, the return to Tochukwu. The day the decree Nisi was finalized, Afoma did not cry. Instead, she felt a lightness she hadn't known since her third year at the University of Nigeria. She packed a single suitcase, leaving behind the designer clothes and jewelry Henry had bought her, and took the first flight to Lagos. The reunion at Zenith Chambers. She didn't call him. She didn't text. She simply showed up at the towering glass edifice of Zenith Chambers. When she stepped into the reception, the staff looked at her with curiosity. She didn't look like a high-profile client. She looked like a woman who had just traveled through a storm to find land. When the doors to the inner office opened, Tochukwu stood there.